Congratulations, Congressman. As I mentioned earlier, culinary education in the schools is a passion of mine. And we have some special guests here tonight from Wellness in the Schools, which is an awesome group, whose programs have been very inspirational to me and many others around the country. It's become an annual tradition that the foundation donates the centerpieces at each table to provide their kids with a fun tasting and gardening experience each year. We're proud to support their work in the public schools. To present our next honoree, please welcome the Director of the Food and Environment Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. He is a 2014 Leadership Award honoree and the Chair of the Leadership Awards Committee. Please welcome Ricardo Salvador. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would also like to begin by acknowledging how delicious this meal is, Chef. With each course, it gets better, and I know that everyone in this room will join me in also recognizing that part of that gratitude is also recognizing the servers in the back of the house, the people that are taking care of us. And as we've heard, that extends all the way to farmers and to farm workers. And so on the note of everyone who is represented here who participates in some way in the food system, I want to say how humbling and inspiring it is every year to return here and to be in a room such as this with people who are putting a dent into the world in terms of improving the problems that we raise and speak about so briefly out of necessity. The issue that our next honoree deals with is too big to capture in a few minutes. But I want to do my best to underscore the fact that while we're here to celebrate, that celebration is a parenthesis in an ongoing massive struggle that is still a serious and pervasive issue in agriculture throughout the world, which is the outright discrimination of certain types of farmers and certain ways of farming, and certain ways of looking at the food system. But we're here to be inspired by the ways that our honorees are actually dealing with that reality. And so while I don't want to spoil the celebratory mood, there are some things that I want to say that I hope are in the category of being sobering, so that we particularly appreciate the successes that we're talking about here this evening. So John Boyd, as we will see in a video shortly here, is someone that continues to work in the issue of eliminating discrimination, particularly against African American farmers, but as we've learned, against all farmers whom, in a major understatement, I refer to as underserved farmers. There's no such thing as being underserved. It's just not being treated equally as every other farmer in the nation ought to be treated. So what I refer to when I say that we're talking about a parenthesis in a long story, it is that one way that we could begin the story of Mr. Boyd's work is to read the abstract that you have in your pamphlet that details what eventually persuaded him that he needed to do something on behalf of other farmers who were experiencing the same sort of discrimination that he had attempted to deal with in his own case. But in fact, we know that the history of those farmers is that they are the descendants of folks who at one time were in exactly the same situation as those over 1,000 slaves that the Coalition of Immokalee Workers helped to emancipate, and that while that example is egregious because we expect that doesn't occur anymore in the modern world, in fact, we're talking about a period of time where this was actually an accepted business practice, a part of the culture protected by law and commerce. So for over 350 years, we systematically stole families from another continent, separated from their cultures, separated from their own foodways, separated them within families so that their language could not be transmitted. Over that 350-year period of time, about 12 million such individuals were transported across the ocean in the most brutal conditions imaginable. Once they were here, they were further brutalized, treated worse than animals, exploited, and their labor created the industrial might of this nation and the commercial power of this nation during early mercantilism and the rise of capitalism. And even after emancipation, as we know, they were systematically excluded from participating in the wealth that their labor helped to create, the very definition of appropriation of labor. And it would be one thing if we said that this story were over after emancipation. It would be one thing to say that the reason why black farming has disappeared in this nation has been that perhaps after emancipation, black farmers wanted to do away with the stigma of being farmers, of being perceived to continue in the role in which they were humiliated for over 350 years, where they had no choice. But, in fact, the story is more complicated than this. The story of systematic exclusion continued, the story of theft of land, the story of legal mechanisms whereby the same rights that other farmers enjoyed on a routine basis were not given to these same farmers. And in order to realize what this means, I want you to reflect just on one thing. We normally, to the extent that we pay attention, study the history of slavery by saying they were the labor force for early plantation agriculture, early large-scale agriculture. In the Americas, particularly in our part of the world, southern part of the United States, the Caribbean, originally this was the tobacco crop, became the sugar crop, became the cotton crop. You can believe that the owners of those plantations were not producing their own food either, so that it was the black labor force that was producing the food supply in these regions. So that it is no exaggeration, no turn of phrase to say that upon emancipation, the single population that had the greatest knowledge and expertise and ability to turn air and light and soil into food was the nation's African American population. So what it means to have driven them from the land, to have stolen their ability to express their entrepreneurship under freedom, means that this nation was robbed of the energy of their creativity and not just their labor. Think of how much farther ahead we would be economically if that tremendous entrepreneurial potential had not been continued captive. So the story of Mr. John Boyd is not just the story of the last few decades. It is the story of someone who experienced this personally by walking in repeatedly to a USDA office, the People's Department, asking for the same loans, the same credits that every other farmer in Virginia knew that they were entitled to, and told that that loan was in process, which meant that during that process, seeds could not be purchased. Machinery could not be contemplated. Or other farmers might be over-leveraged by buying housing, buying animals to fatten, and eventually not being able to pay their bills because they were systematically discriminated against, while their neighboring farmers did just fine with the backing of the US government, and eventually having to sell their land because of that debt. So that land loss story is part of the systematic way in which they've been driven from the land. So Mr. John Boyd has demonstrated several things in his work. Because we don't have a whole lot of time to go into the depth, the importance of work that he started by beginning a snowball that, as you know, ended up in the two landmark Pigford settlements. Let me just say the following. It was the example of a movement whereby Mr. Boyd, who could have settled his own problem, who could have gone back to his own farm, decided that this needed to change for all black farmers in this country, and I come back to my initial comments. The story is not over. The struggle is ongoing. That discrimination and exclusion continues, to the point where at this very day we're still talking about whether African American people can even vote without the same sorts of rights that the rest of us expect. Mr. Boyd has helped to build a movement. He is still on the front lines. It is deeply humbling to be in the same room with this man. Let us see a brief summary of this work in the video. Please join me in congratulating Mr. John Boyd.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to give honor to God first and foremost, because I know without God, I certainly wouldn't be here tonight. Yes. Thank you, James Beard Foundation. Give yourself a round of applause for raising the highlight of people's stories like mine and all of the other stories that you heard here tonight that are making a difference. Somebody said, making a dent. I think you're making more than a dent. We got half the car. We just need the other half so we can ride. We're really making a difference, and thank you again. First of all, I would like to thank my beautiful wife who's here, who stood beside me through all of the ups and downs and all of the roller coaster ride. Everybody needs a good other half, don't you? Give my wife a round of applause. I love her dearly for putting up with me. I'm not too easy to put up with. And then there's my parents. My parents are farmers. My grandfather, who you saw in the photograph, Thomas Boyd, was an amazing individual who was able to hold on to his land after the Civil War. His father, Andrew Boyd, was a slave breeder. So we have a long, rich history of farming in our blood. And I'm proud to be a farmer, people. I'm proud to grow food in this amazing country. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. I would just like to talk a little bit about my story, and then I'm gone. I worked for nearly 30 years to help defeat the United States Department of Agriculture and help make a difference not only in the lives of black farmers, but Native American farmers, Hispanic farmers, women farmers, all of the other groups. I drug them right along with me. And when the statute of limitations was expired by Judge Paul Friedman, he said, well, you can go to Congress. If Congress would lift the statute of limitations, I would hear this case in the federal court. And I went to Congress, and nobody gave me a chance. I had no legislative experience whatsoever. And they said, Mr. Boyd, you need a bill to lift the statute. I knew nothing about writing a bill, but I knew how to read. And I wrote that bill, and it passed. That bill was sponsored by Chuck Robb in the Senate and Maxine Waters in the House, a very gutsy lady from California. Y'all give Maxine Waters a round of applause. She's a food person, too. And the next bill, even after we went to court, I filed that same lawsuit in every federal courthouse from Texas all the way up to Virginia. And the answer was the same every time: no, we're not going to hear this case. I heard no so many times that, to me, no meant yes. They just weren't ready to say yes yet. No means yes. Y'all remember that, advocates? No means yes. And we finally went to federal court, and Judge Paul Friedman said I wanted to hear this case. And I knew that there was something special about this judge, that this judge believed in fairness. And the Justice Department, Michael Sitkoff, said, Your Honor, we're not ready to hear this case today. And he said, well, you should never walk into my courtroom and not be prepared to hear your case. So I respect Judge Paul Friedman. I know that he hasn't given us every victory that I wanted him to see, but he certainly took a chance on this very, very historic case. And I've done everything differently on Capitol Hill. I studied every member of Congress. I studied about their families. I studied about where they went to school. I wanted to know everything about that member of Congress. And I didn't get 2 minutes. I had 30 seconds. I would give them 30 seconds, and I would ask them for their support. I went in the doors that they went in to work. I didn't stand out front. I said, what door does Senator Ted Kennedy go in? And I would wait there for Senator Ted Kennedy, and I would tell them what my name was, and I said, I need your support on this bill. Those are the things that I've done differently that wasn't by the textbook. And I waited outside with my trusty mule named Struggle and 40 acres. I had him parked right outside the Capitol. And when that didn't work, I brought my tractor to Washington, D.C. named Justice. And I rode around Capitol Hill until somebody passed that law. These are things that we have to be willing to do. that are not by the textbook, people. And that's what I tried to do, and went on to settle the largest case in history for not only Native American farmers, but for black farmers, $1.25 billion. And I want to give President Obama, who signed that historic bill into law on December 8, 2010, ending those chapters not only for black farmers, but Hispanic farmers, women farmers. He signed that bill into law that many other presidents wouldn't dare to put their signature on. And I had the opportunity to meet with every president since Jimmy Carter. Yeah, I'm that old. I'm telling on myself tonight. Yes, I'm that old. Jimmy Carter was the most informative president for agriculture, period. Period, people. Even President Obama, Jimmy Carter was more knowledgeable than all of the presidents on agriculture issues. He may not have been the most effective president, but he certainly was the best on farming issues. And I'm gonna close on this short story. Secretary Brock, this was when I was very, very green. I've been pressing President Reagan at that time for a meeting to discuss the rights of black farmers and other minority farmers alike. And they said, well, Ronald Reagan is not gonna meet with you. President Reagan, excuse me. I believe in giving the office the highest respect. President Reagan. Huh? Is that okay? Now they just say Obama, like he ain't nobody. Like he's nobody, he just showed up off the corner. The man's a two-term president, and we should respect the office of president regardless of who's in there, Republican or Democrat. And Secretary Brock met with me, and they told me I had to have that meeting that day, and I left my farm in Virginia, and I had a pair of coveralls on and a brown flannel shirt, and I'll never forget it. And I sat into what they call the cage at the United States Department of Agriculture. And the guy came out, and he said, well, the guy's here to have the meeting with you for the black farmers, you know, John Boyd. And he said, what the H does he want? That's what he said, and they talked about me like I was a third party right outside. I'm sitting there looking at this guy have this conversation. And I said, one day I'm gonna grow up and fix this system. That's what I said to myself. So thank you, Secretary Brock, for encouraging me to whoop the last plantation, the United States Department of Agriculture. And as I close tonight, I want to tell you, don't give up. When friends and family tell you that you can't do something, don't give up. My grandfather said, a landless culture is a powerless culture. Those who don't know how to garden will soon perish as fools. These are things that a man said with a third-grade education. He said the land never discriminated against anybody, people do. This is a man who said this with third-grade education. I thought my grandfather was crazy saying these things. But I thank God for him in teaching me how to be respectful, how to tell the truth, and how to go seek about changing justice. He said, when you see something wrong, go out and try to fix it. Don't wait for the next man to do it. These are things that my grandparents taught me. So as I leave tonight, I want to tell you, don't give up. When friends and family tell you that you can't do something, don't give up. Be the absolute best at what it is that you do. If you're a chef, be the absolute best chef. If you're a street sweeper, be the absolute best street sweeper. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, be the absolute best. If you want to be a food advocate, be the absolute best. But don't never, ever, ever give up in trying to do what's right for this country. Thank you very much. And thank you so very, very much for this award. It means so much to me. And for all the black farmers that went on before me that didn't see this night happen, thank you. None of my board members are living. None of my board members are living. It's been so long, waiting for justice. Thank you very much.